Good morning, Boker Tov. In this week's Torah portion, we have the famous story of the binding of Isaac that we just read on Rosh Hashanah in synagogues around the world. And it's found in this week's Torah portion. And when we hear the story of the binding of Isaac, the word that comes to mind is Hineni. The word that Abraham responded, I am ready, I am prepared to do what you ask me to do, God. We think of Abraham's complete surrender to the will of God. However, our rabbis point out that as Abraham goes to the binding, it says that on the third day, he saw the mountain, Mount Moriah, with a cloud over it, the place that he would bind his son and offer him as a sacrifice. And our rabbis ask, why did God wait 3 days to show him the mountain? And the rabbis say, because God wanted him to have time to reconsider. God wanted him to think about it. And indeed, the Medrash says that God sent the Satan, the angel, to try to dissuade him, to convince him not to sacrifice his son. And here we have a very powerful contrast. On the one hand, Abraham's complete submission to the will of God with the word Hineni. But God also says, it's not enough to just surrender blindly. I want you to wrestle with the decision. I want you to think about it. I want you to contemplate it. Physically, with your mind, with your emotions. And the greatness of Abraham was not just that he went blindly, without thinking or without feeling, to sacrifice his son. But despite the internal struggle and his love for his son and his desire for his son to live, he surrendered his will to the will of Hashem. And indeed, one of the prayers we say on the high holidays is the one who answered Abraham at Mount Moriah, may he answer our prayers. And the question is, what did Abraham pray for at Mount Moriah? And the answer is, he prayed that God should revoke his command, that God should let his son live. And indeed, his prayers were answered. And we say, as God answered Abraham's prayers on Mount Moriah, he should answer ours. And God said, do not touch the lad. Do not lay a hand on him. It was all merely a test. And when I think about today, which is Veterans Day, I think about the Akedah, the ultimate sacrifice. All the young soldiers who died defending our freedom in this country. They had mothers and fathers who paid the ultimate price of losing their beloved children. And like Abraham, these soldiers wanted to live, and their parents wanted them to come home, just like Abraham wanted to bring home Isaac to his wife, Sarah. But despite the fact that they loved life just as much as us and wanted to live and go home to their wives and children and mothers and fathers, they overcame their love for life to sacrifice their lives for their ideals, for their values, to preserve freedom and to grant it as a gift to each and every one of us. And in particular, as Jews, who survived the Holocaust, my own grandparents who survived Auschwitz, it was the Allied forces, American troops that came and liberated the camps. And so we have a tremendous debt of gratitude today on Veterans Day. And it's not enough to take the day off or to go shopping, but we actually have to show our gratitude and thank our veterans and appreciate the ultimate sacrifice that so many of them made, including over 500,000 American Jews who fought in World War II. It's a story told by a fellow by the name of Charles Plum. He was a pilot, a jet pilot in Vietnam, and he was shot down over enemy territory, captured, and spent 6 years as a POW in Vietnam. Ultimately, he was released. He came back to America, got married, and one day he was out in a restaurant with his wife, and he was sitting there when suddenly a young man walks by him and he says, "Are you Charles Plum?" He said, "Yes." He says, "Were you a pilot jet fighter in Vietnam?" He said, "Yes." He says, "Were you on the U.S. Navy ship Kitty Hawk?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I was the one who packed your parachute." And then he smiled at him, pump-fisted him, and said, "I guess it worked." And Charles Plum said, it sure did work. If it didn't work, I wouldn't be here today. And Charles Plum tells the story, and he says he went home and thought to himself, how many times did I pass this sailor on the ship? Did I say good morning to him? Did I say good evening to him? Did I say hello? Did I smile at him? Or did I just walk by him thinking, I'm a pilot, he's just a sailor? But he was down there in the bowels of the ship sewing my parachute and putting it into its bag and putting it aboard my jet plane so that my life could be saved. And so too, each and every one of us have to always ask ourselves, who packed your parachute? Because for Charles Plum to survive, of course he needed a physical parachute, but he needed a mental parachute, an emotional parachute, a spiritual parachute, a physical parachute, in order to endure his being shot down and 6 years in captivity. When we go through struggles or challenges, we have to always remember somebody prepared us for this mission. Someone gave us the strength, someone packed our parachute, and we always have to be grateful. Today, we're grateful to all the veterans who served to defend our freedom, to give us this blessing of the United States of America. They packed our parachute. We have to live with gratitude, and part of that gratitude is making sure that their sacrifice was not in vain, that we as Americans can put aside our differences, and as they gave the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, we could sacrifice a little by showing respect for one another, working together with our fellow Americans, coming across lines of division and saying, let's put our differences aside and work for the betterment of our country, our nation, our people, and ultimately the entire world. Have a wonderful day.